Good morning. Before I start, I have to say that I'm a little bit tired and possibly a little hungover because I had book club last night. So bear with me. Our critics this morning, to my left, we have Teresa Weaver, who was the book editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution from 1998 till 2007, when the position was eliminated, as it was with many publications around that time.
Boo.
Yeah. Boo, hiss. She moved to the nonprofit world, becoming editorial director at Habitat for Humanity International, while also writing a monthly book column for Atlanta Magazine. In 8 years at Habitat, she traveled to 16 countries and 26 U.S. states to write about the organization's work building houses with people in need. In 2015, she became a resource development writer at CARE USA, where she creates proposals and reports on projects that fight poverty and empower women in 94 countries around the world. She served on the board of the National Book Critics Circle from 2000 until 2006 and continues to serve on the Advisory Council of the Georgia Center for the Book. Adam Parker earned a couple of degrees in music performance, then spent a decade in the business world before enrolling in Columbia University's journalism school and making a mid-career switcheroo. He doesn't look that old, does he?
Aww.
He has taught journalism as an adjunct professor at the College of Charleston and worked at the Post and Courier as a copy editor, metro editor, general assignment reporter, restaurant critic, religion reporter, arts writer, concert reviewer, book reviewer, and book page editor. He also coordinates the paper's immersive coverage of the Spoleto and Piccolo Spoleto festivals. Please welcome Teresa and Adam. Okay, so these are the book critics, and I'm the one who gets to just ask the questions while they answer them. First, I'd like to ask both of you what led you into your professional careers in the business of books. Obviously, you've done other things, but did you grow up dreaming of being a book critic? Teresa, we'll start with you.
It wasn't really that organized. I always loved reading in my whole life, and I was actually working as the op-ed editor at the AJC. It's Journal-Constitution, and the features editor at the time, she and I'd often given her book recommendations, so she knew I was a big reader, and she came to me one day and said, I know you like what you're doing, but would you consider this? We want to change the book editing position so that it's more timely. We want to react more to books that are in the news. We want it to be much more than an academic kind of review page. And we want to expand it and make it much more interactive and interesting. So she said, would you have any interest in that? And I think I tore the door down running out to get there. It was exactly what I wanted to be doing, and I didn't really know that until I started doing it. So, it was a dream job. It was, that's what made it so traumatic leaving it, was that it really was exactly as great as you want it to be. It was reading for a living. It was crazy busy, and some days were better than others, but it's a dream job. But no, I didn't. As a little girl, I just wanted to read books. I didn't know that there was a career you could make out of reading them and writing about them. It's a nice surprise.
Well, I did not grow up dreaming about becoming a book reviewer or book page editor, but I did grow up reading a lot, and then when I started writing, among the things I wrote, even when I was doing other kinds of reporting and writing at the newspaper, I would occasionally write a book review or a concert review or other kinds of criticism, and discovered an interest and a passion for that kind of writing, and also conceived of its importance as well, to my mind anyway, and ended up as book page editor kind of by default, really. I had replaced Bill Thompson, my predecessor, who retired some years ago. He was in charge of the art section and the book page, which appears in the art section. And he retired, and it was logical for me to assume his position because of my own background in the arts and having contributed over the years to the book page anyway, and so on. So it just sort of happened that way for me.
Okie doke. Well, what do you both think makes a book fit for reviewing? What makes an interesting, books flow into your offices when you're a book reviewer. At least they flow into my office. I'm not even a book reviewer. What makes you choose one book to review and maybe not another? Is there a formula?
I wish there were. Back at the height of the publishing industry and the newspaper industry, the AJC, we were getting 200 books a day. That gives you some idea of the volume that comes in. And I had one assistant who opened the mail, who physically tore open the envelopes, took the books out, put them in some kind of stacking order. So I always told people it's not brain surgery at that point, it's triage. It's deciding which of these move forward, which of these 200 books a day do you give to charity, do you, give away, do you throw in the trash? It's all over the place, but you have to make snap decisions. And sometimes I'm sure you miss things. You have to. But what I always looked for, there clearly were authors and books that you knew we needed to review. That was pretty obvious, and my assistant was really good at flagging some that had been getting a lot of buzz.
Did you focus mainly on, did you try to focus on sort of regional authors, or were you at the Journal-Constitution were probably doing national?
Definitely national with a real regional. I thought we should be the authority on Southern literature. I thought that was our role. Again, at the height of it, when we had resources and everything. So that was definitely, I wanted to do books that the New York Times and the Post wouldn't do.
Might not be doing.
Yeah, so I thought that was important to give those voices. And sometimes it really was an interesting cover that would catch my eye.
Okay.
Sometimes it was just something you had heard other people in the industry talk about with great excitement. Books really do have buzz, and that's different from hype, which is hype is very orchestrated. Buzz is more of an organic thing that happens in the publishing world. That's legitimate. That's publishers seeing something that another publisher has got rights to, but being so excited about it because they're readers too. So that goes a long way with me. If a publisher at one house would recommend something from another house, I say, well, that's probably worth looking at. Sometimes the backstories were just interesting, and I would hear just about an author who came from a certain place and had a backstory.
Catch your fancy.
But it was something, I was always looking for something different, something surprising.
So what you're saying is there really was not a formula.
There can't be, I don't think. Do you?
Can you add to that?
Well, we do have, not really a formula, but a certain set of guidelines in a way. Because we would get so many books and because we have limited resources to review them, mostly freelancers who we don't even pay.
You don't pay them anything?
Sorry.
We let them keep the book.
They get a book.
Here, have
and
a book.
A byline,
And a
right?
byline. They get a byline and a book. We have Bill Thompson, I think, more or less set these rules. So we review fiction and nonfiction hardcovers. If it's paperback only, we probably won't review it. I make a few exceptions for that, but they're calculated exceptions. For the most part, it should come out in hardcover. It should be fiction, nonfiction, nothing self-published. We don't review self-published books. And we tend not to review poetry, but only because we don't have people who are equipped to do that. I would love to review more poetry, frankly, if that were possible. So we have certain basic guidelines like that. One thing that I tend to do is judge books by their cover. I love judging books by their cover. I do it all the time. And I'll tell you, the cover tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Who the publisher is, the design, you can tell a lot about a book by its cover, I think. Don't you think? Not always, but a lot. So you see things that clearly look like their quality and their importance, and then of course the authors themselves. And what we do is we open up all the packages and we put the books in a case, and we have a small cadre of reviewers who come in every once in a while and look through the books that are on display in the case, and they select. So we basically leave it to our reviewers to kind of pick and choose books of interest. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I will send books to people. They don't even necessarily know what they're going to get, but I send them. And sometimes I find somebody to review a particular book. We do try to give a little space to South Carolina books, South Carolina authors, South Carolina publishers, to some extent, and regional things as well. But, as often as not, we review mainstream things.
Do you feel like you do more fiction or nonfiction? Or sort of a mix?
Kind of a mix. We've got a couple of longtime reviewers. Kathy Holmes comes immediately to mind. She's a professor of English at the College of Charleston and a longtime book reviewer. And she reviews almost always fiction, novels, sometimes short stories, mostly novels, and reviews fairly often, which is wonderful. She's also terrific. So we publish a lot of her reviews, and occasionally when I write a review, it's often a novel. So I don't know, probably about half and half, I would think.
You have this cadre of reviewers, and you probably, after a while, get a sense of who likes what kind of book, I would think, who's going to choose what. Okay, well, when one of you is writing a review yourselves, instead of having someone else do it for you, how do you approach a book that you're going to review, as opposed to one you're just reading for fun? Who wants to start?
I get a big stack of sticky notes when I start reading, and that's my process. And if it's an advanced reader, if it's a galley, if it's not a real book, I don't want to ruin a real book, but I will mark up a galley pretty dramatically with just underlining things I like or don't like. In particular, I turn down pages. By the end of it, the book has been beat to death. It's been through a lot. But the sticky notes I put on pages that I want to go back to or quote or revisit in some way. But it's a much slower process than if I'm just reading for pleasure. And when I was a book editor, I would read quickly to see if something was worth sending out for review. So that's a different kind of reading than if you're reading to review it yourself. So you're just kind of skimming, and you get 25 pages into a novel and you think, this is really good, I'm going to send it out to somebody. So that's a very different kind of reading.
Or no way am I sending this out.
This is going straight to the trash heap. But if I'm reading it for reviewing, it's a very careful, methodical, lots of notes.
Okay.
It's a much different process.
Adam, do you do similarly?
No, not really. I want to do similarly, but I never do. I think to myself, okay, I'm going to write in the mind. Once or twice I've done that. Like once I remember some years ago, I was reviewing, a book came in by, what was his name? Shelby. A conservative African-American writer.
Shelby Steele.
Shelby Steele.
Yeah.
And I had written about some of his work previously. In fact, the first thing that I ever had published ever was a super long letter to the editor to Harper's Magazine. And it was in response to an article that they had published by Shelby Steele, which I hated. And I got mad, and I wrote this long screed, and they published it verbatim, like this long. It was the lead letter. My name was in the table of contents. It was so exciting. So sure enough, Shelby Steele's new book comes in one day, and I'm like, but I want to give him a chance. Definitely want to give him a chance. Got to give the guy a chance. So I pick up the book, and I'm like, I clear my mind. I'm open-minded. I'm good. I'm fine. I want him to make some compelling arguments, even if I don't necessarily agree with them. And I'm reading and making notes in the margins, and very carefully, and highlighting problematic passages and putting asterisks everywhere and so on and so forth, so that I could go back and because I know that the review I'm going to write is going to be pretty critical probably, and I'm going to need to kind of really pick apart his arguments and offer counter arguments and this kind of thing. It was a particular case. Usually I don't do that at all. Usually I find myself just reading the book. I just read it, and I just read it, and then I go back sometimes, and I'll even think to myself in advance, okay, I'm going to want to quote from the book, right? So, when I come across, and I forget, and then I don't mark the quotes, I just read the book, right? And then I have to go back and kind of find the quotes. It's horrible.
What are we going to do with you?
I think in an ideal world, don't you think that you would have time and energy to read it twice and to read it like you do, right?
Yeah.
To read it just all the way through to see, is this a good book?
Yeah.
Is it enjoyable? Is it a good experience? And then go back through
And
pull out the
highlight.
quotes and highlight.
Right.
Well,
But nobody has that time.
And one problem I have is, this is not my main job. Like, my main job is arts writing. I have to produce all this copy for the newspaper week after week. So the book page is this thing, this extra thing. And even reviewing books I find increasingly difficult with the time it takes. It's not like I'm getting credit for the byline, per se. So I'm very selective about the books I review.
So you only review them rarely at this point. You prefer to give them out to your other reviewers?
Over the last year or so, that tends to be the
Unless
case.
it's Shelby Steele and you have a bone in the
No,
back, right?
yeah, well, no. But now and again, so a book will come. I remember when James Salter's latest book came in, I grabbed it, and there are a few others that I'll just want to write about myself.
Right. Well,
Those were interesting answers. How seriously do you all take your responsibility as recommenders of books to your readers? I mean, is that sort of a sacred responsibility to you, or is it just like, here's another article I'm writing,
Well, I mean, theoretically it's sacred, yes. And in an ideal world, a book editor should be wholly devoted to that page and have a cadre of reviewers that she manages and can be very selective in what goes on the page and so on. To edit, not just, to edit on various levels. In my case, beggars can't be choosers, in a sense. And so I rely on and trust our cadre of reviewers, most of whom are really wonderful and know what they love. Ben Moise, who writes about terrific, and so we have, and Jonathan, who's been writing a few things now lately. So I got good reviewers, and so I can trust them to just do a good job, and even to help me figure out what needs to be reviewed. Somebody will Kathy will send me an email, or Jonathan, what about this book? I mean, I would love to review this. Would you like it? And I look it up, and I go, yeah, I'll take that. Absolutely. That'd be great.
I think there is a sacred nature to it, and I took it incredibly seriously. One incident that springs to mind is I had about 100 reviewers on my payroll that we had all the paperwork for, that I knew, I had vetted, and they reviewed regularly for me. Some of them just once a year, some of them every other week. I mean, it varied tremendously.
You were actually paying them at that?
Not unless, yeah. Oh yeah, we paid pretty well right up till the end. I don't know what they're doing now, but when I was there, we paid $300 for a review.
Nice.
And they got the book. So, those were the glory days, though. Who knew? I thought that wasn't a tremendous amount of money. I didn't think then.
No.
But,
it didn't used to be at all.
No, but I'm glad, and I had to fight for it because they kept trying to cut it. But and I did every once in a while have to use, if I got toward the end of the month and I used up my complete budget, I would have to use a wire review. But I tried really hard to always have original voices in the paper. But there, on that list of 100, there was one who did things for me. He wasn't one of my favorites, but he was reliable, and I knew he would turn things in on time and the right length. But he really pushed. One time he wanted to review this one particular book of short stories that I hadn't heard anything about. There hadn't been a lot of buzz about. There was no local connection, no southern connection. And he just kept saying, this is just the greatest collection of stories I've read in years. And I said, well, you're so excited about it, go ahead. And he wrote about it, and we published it. And then I found out later that the author was a friend of the family and lived in his basement. And I was so mad at him, I fired him. I mean, I never used him again, and told him and he said, it really is good. And I said, it could be the best one ever, but the way that happened is not okay.
It's not right.
And people have to trust that the reviewers that I'm using do not have any vested interest in what they're reviewing. And I was so angry at him for that. Never used him again. So you have to, those things I take really seriously.
Did you ever read that book?
I read enough of it, and it was perfectly fine, but there was no way it was as good as what he was saying. So
it would not have made the cut.
Never
probably.
in a million years.
All right. Well, here's an interesting question to me. I'm assuming you've both had some experiences with writers that you've reviewed, whether good or bad. Responses, letters. Does anybody remember one? Either of you remember one in particular?
It doesn't happen often, actually. Very rarely will an author respond or comment on a review, but it has happened a couple of times. Once I reviewed Charles Marsh's book, and I forget the title, but basically it was about evangelical Christianity in America. And he's an evangelical Christian. And he was being critical of evangelical Christianity, basically telling people to shut up and just stop. Like, think, pray, be who you are, but stop with all the politics and focus on your faith. And I reviewed this book and got a lovely response from him. And I was thrilled to get it because Charles Marsh had also written a civil rights book, which I had admired. In fact, I've been using recently. So it was kind of cool to hear from this pretty prominent theologian guy in whichever university he was at, Virginia, I think. But the best ever was a response I got from the author Margaret Winkle, I think was her name, and she wrote a novel called Wash, which is short for Washington, which was about slavery, and a remarkable book, I thought, and very underrated and little known, but quite a remarkable book. And I wrote a pretty glowing review, but a detailed review, sort of explaining why it was so good and what she had succeeded in doing so effectively and so on. And apparently she saw it and loved it and sent me a note, which was very, very touching. She was really moved and thrilled that the reviewer had understood what she was trying to do, which I suppose every author hopes for, and she got from me. I mean, it really is a great book. I highly recommend it. She uses quite a stunning voice in it, that's very unique and very effective. And there might have been one or two others, but not much. Those are the two I see.
You've never had an author be angry with you?
Once there was an author angry with me. It was I didn't write the review though, thank God.
Oh.
Although it wouldn't matter now. Okay. I had assigned this book, and it was a local book, sort of about Charleston, and there was this Charleston connection. And I think there was an expectation, therefore, that the Charleston paper would write this glowing review about this Charleston. And the book was mediocre, and the reviewer said so. It wasn't a terrible review. It didn't trash the book at all. It was very respectful and very fair. But it wasn't glowing, and the author and her manager were pissed and said so. But I didn't care.
I had... in my 9 years at the AJC and then 8 years at Atlanta Magazine, I had 2 authors that were unpleasant.
Okay.
And beyond, and I had lots of really good experiences and mostly it was, like you said, it was authors who were grateful that I'd actually read the book and got it. I think I got charming notes from people that I really respected. And one of the unpleasant experiences was a review that I assigned. It was Donald Harrington wrote the review for me. Do y'all know Donald Harrington? He's one of the unsung heroes of Southern literature, so go look him up. Harrington with one R. He's
Apparently
fantastic.
He's very unsung.
Hey, right? If nobody in this room has even heard of him, he's fantastic. He passed away a few years ago, but he is just a remarkable writer and wrote this fiction that Lee Smith was one of his big fans. She introduced me to him years ago, but he became one of my reviewers. So for really good fiction that I wanted to farm out and get a really good job, I would send it to him, and he would review it for me. And he reviewed T.R. Pearson's novel. I don't even remember. It was True Cross, and I can't remember what year it was, like early 2000s. And T.R. Pearson I loved. I loved his stuff. I thought he was a really interesting novelist and did some great stuff. I did not read this one sent it to Donald to review for me. He wrote a review, and again, it was not scathing. It was not horrible. It wasn't a pan by any means. It was essentially, this is a really good novel. This is what might have been done better, you know. So there were some very reasoned critiques. And T.R. Pearson was coming to town to do an event that week, so that's why I ran the review on Sunday. Then he was coming in later that week, and I had set up an interview with him because I wanted to just do a Q&A because I'd never met him and really admired his work. He got so mad about the review, he canceled the interview. And his publicist called me to say that, and you know, he said, I am so sorry. I have tried to talk him out of this. I've told him the review's not that bad, but he doesn't want to do the interview. He feels like he's being set up. And I said, set up? I mean, it's a good review. I'm a nice person. I don't know what the problem is here. And the publicist had done his best to tell him that was not a good idea to burn that bridge, and you know, he was overreacting. He just would not back down, so he wouldn't do the interview. And the next time he had a novel come in, I didn't even review it because it's like I don't know how to handle this.
Right.
So I regret that. I really do. I don't know why he took it that badly. And the only other one was, it was a column I wrote. It was not a review, but it was definitely that was the most one of the two most negative things I've ever written in my life was about The Wind Done Gone, the Alice Randall novel. I hated that novel. Hated it.
And you said so.
Oh. But I told why. I mean, I told why it didn't work, and maybe I wasn't the audience, and we were the AJC, so I felt like the Atlanta newspaper had to weigh in on that book. I mean, it was a parody of Gone with the Wind, for those of you who've been lucky enough not to read it. It's just I didn't think it worked on any level. I just was annoyed by it and didn't like it, and wrote a column about that. And again, wasn't saying she ought to be taken out back and shot or anything, but didn't like the book and wrote that in my column with my name and picture on it, and she just blew up. I mean, she really hated the newspaper, hated everybody who worked there.
She canceled her subscription.
Yeah. It took her a year. I don't know if she ever got over it, frankly, but she was in this lawsuit with the Mitchell estate, with the Margaret Mitchell estate for years over whether she should have even written the book. And my advice would have been no.
You pushed her buttons.
No, but that was unpleasant. I mean, I don't like that kind of reaction from somebody. I understand it. I mean, that she spent a lot of time on that book, and it's very personal to her, and I understand where that comes from. But in all those years, I think just to have those few really bad experiences is not bad.
Well, I've noticed something. Writers can be sensitive.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I think everybody on this stage is one. So
And they don't always understand how newspapers work. You know, that's the other thing. We're managing an opinion page, which is totally distinct and independent from the newsroom or the columnists who are also writing opinion, but a different kind of opinion, you know, on the editorial side of things. And people don't really understand, very often I find, the difference between a review and a column and an op-ed and an editorial and a reported story and an analysis. You know, there are all these different...
But they're all opinion. I mean, people don't understand that this isn't necessarily the way the whole newspaper feels about this book either.
Right. Freelancers versus staff. I mean, you know, and that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't expect the average reader to know all the ins and outs and all the details of the business and how it works. But certain basic things, I regret more people don't fully understand, like the difference between news and opinion.
It tends to blur sometimes these days. Or people think it blurs.
Sort
I don't
of,
know.
maybe in some places, but
Yeah, not at your paper or yours, I'm sorry. But you're not at a paper anymore. Okay, well, I'm going to veer off just a bit. And as book reviewers, which is what we're focusing on now, though I know you're all both much more than that, what do you think is the value of book clubs? We're here at a book club convention, which I've never heard of before. Have y'all ever been to one of these before? I think it's pretty exciting, actually. So what do you think the value of book clubs is?
Well, I will start by saying I've never been in a book club, but there are reasons for that.
You have no clue.
Well, no, because here's what happens. Everybody I know is in a book club, and I have, like, for instance, I have a happy hour group on Wednesday that's mostly friends and other nonprofits around Atlanta, but we've started this tradition a few years ago of meeting every Wednesday for happy hour, and always turns into a book club discussion, because I ask them, so what's your book club reading? And then they'll tell me, and then and they all weigh in. It always evolves.
So you're in several
I
book
feel
clubs.
like I'm in several. I'm not an official member of any. But for all those years when I worked in books, I was uncomfortable being in a group like that, because people always looked to me to lead the discussion, and they looked to me for the definitive opinion, and I felt like they were, like it wasn't an equal group. It's not that
like
I felt
suddenly you were like the big expert,
Right.
and it couldn't just be a
like if they
a
were
fun
all
group of
disagreeing
friends.
about what book to read, they'd look to me and say, Teresa, which book should we read?
Yeah,
And
or is this book good or not, Teresa?
right. And what does the author mean here? And I'm like, I'm not inside their head.
Right.
So for so many years I didn't do that. I as much as I love reading, it's such a solitary thing. I think book clubs are fantastic in that they build on that solitary love of reading, and they turn it into something just really communal, and so many people get so much out of it. So I love book clubs. I love the discussions that come out of them, and I love that that drives book sales in a
Yeah.
lot of places. I mean, it really does make a difference. So
And I think book reviews drive people to choose these books for
Right.
their book clubs. So
Right.
it all feeds into each other. Adam, you're a
Yeah.
man. Are you in a book club?
I'm not. I'm not in a book club.
Are there book clubs with men? I don't even know.
I think it's illegal.
Kidding. I know. I'm kidding.
No, I'm not, and never have been. But I do love book clubs. I mean, I think the whole concept is brilliant. I think it brings people together. Reading is a solitary endeavor, but then you bring people together to talk about it and think critically and debate and disagree or agree, and the best case scenario here is that that engenders a deeper understanding of the book, that you're really pulling out things that you wouldn't necessarily have discovered on your own because you're doing it together with other readers who share the experience. The downside, I suppose, is there is sometimes the possibility of a kind of consensus that doesn't always encourage a lot of criticism and debate. But from what I've heard, there's very often very colorful debate, and so I think it's fantastic. The world is a much better place because of book clubs overall, I would say.
From the man who's never been in one.
Yes.
No, as someone who is in a book club, you were correct. I agree with both of you. Let's see. Jonathan, do we have a lot of time, or do we need to open the floor soon? I've got a few more questions.
You've got time for more.
All right. Okay. What are your thoughts on the changing landscape of publishing and, by extension, literature? That's one of Jonathan's questions.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. It's just a small question with not many facets. So, if you have any thoughts on that, go for it.
wow, just a narrow little question.
What is the changing landscape, first of all?
I have to say, in all honesty, I have thoroughly enjoyed not following the business of publishing for the past 2 years at least, because it's exhausting. It's exhausting trying to keep up, trying to make sense of it. I still believe to this day that I think no matter how crazy it gets, the publishing industry, there are so many people in it who truly love books. And I think that goes a long way. They are in a business, of course, and they want to make money and all that. I think it's harder and harder for people to get through all the noise and to be heard, to be published. I think second novels have become even harder than first novels.
To get published?
Yeah, I think it's a tough landscape to break into, and the reality, the social media, what that's done to promoting books kind of makes me crazy. And it's another reason I'm kind of glad I'm out of it, because I think there are so many demands on authors now. And some authors are introverts. They truly don't want to get out there and they don't want to be as public and they don't want to be your Facebook friend, but they have to. I mean, that's a part of it now. And I think a lot of the public events and everything is just harder to cut through all the noise just because there's so much of it. And the people who are better at the public side of it aren't always the best writers. So
Absolutely
the ones
agree.
getting a lot of the attention are not the ones that are really writing stuff that you should care about.
Here's the question: why do you think a second novel, if a first novel is successful and gets
What's
buzz?
successful? I mean, it's the
Yeah, I don't
definition
even know
of
anymore.
the definition of success keeps moving. I mean,
Right.
it just keeps shifting, and I think some of the levels that they expect books to operate at, it takes a while to build an audience. I mean, especially if you're a literary writer, it takes a few books to kind of find your feet sometimes.
And a good review.
Yeah.
And there are fewer and fewer places reviewing. So
I mean,
it's-
seriously, you guys hold a lot of power in terms of being book editors, book page editors, or you do still, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I take full credit for the movie, this new movie, Call Me By Your Name. I take credit.
That's you?
Yeah. No, I reviewed the book when it came out.
Okay. Like, I haven't heard of that one.
I was like one of many who reviewed the book, so it's probably not. But I'll take the credit anyway. So, I gave it a good review. It's an excellent book. Beautiful book. And now it's a movie. So, there you go.
The connection is direct and clear.
Yeah. The book business is a kind of an extraordinary. The statistics I've seen show that more books are being published, more good books by Main Street, and bought than ever before. So this traditional publishing industry is not hurting, I don't think, terribly, as far as I can tell. Jonathan, I mean, it's complicated, I'm sure. There's a lot of new competition. There's a lot going on online. There's obviously the whole self-publishing, vanity press business is booming hugely, and some of those books are really good. Some people are self-publishing or quasi-self-publishing.
But you won't review them, you said.
But we won't review them.
Just wondering, why?
Well, because it's hard to here's my rationale. I don't know if it's good. You tell me if it's good or not. But my rationale is, when a manuscript goes through the normal traditional process, and it goes through an agent maybe, to a publisher, and it gets edited by the publisher, there's an editing process. The end result is this, sort of like a newspaper article, right? It's not just me posting to a blog. I have a bunch of editors, they go through, there's a communal thing. A book ends up, like an article, being the product of the company itself, of the publisher itself. And indeed, in the newspaper world, they have the copyright to all my stuff. And the editors will back me up if there's some problem out in the world, right? They'll defend me or the report, because it's not just me who did this. And a book now, of course, a novel is one thing, but a nonfiction book is another. I know there are nuances here, but basically, I think you get my point. There's this process, and the end result is a product that has integrity, or at least the odds are it has integrity. Whereas a self-published book doesn't go through that rigorous process. So the book has already been edited. It's already been approved. It's already gone through this process by the time it gets to me, and I assign it to it. So the self-publishing thing, I mean, at some point, the line is going to get blurred, and at some point, I can imagine, we would write reviews of such books. But that raises how do you select them, and how do you vet them, and how do you go? It's just a complicated thing that we just chosen not to cross that line yet.
Well, and I'll just go out there and say, now that I'm out of the business and can't get drummed out of it, 99.9% of self-published stuff is not good. And the tiny little fraction that is good will get discovered by a publisher someday.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I truly believe that the process will work. It's not always as fast as some
happened.
people want. Right. And I do. There might be a diamond in the rough somewhere, but who's got the time? I mean, with the workload and everything, there's just... And the 200 books a day that we got in the AJC, that doesn't count self-published. I mean, I didn't even count those in that total. So that's... there's a lot of good books that you don't have room to review, that you don't have the resources to review. So there's... That was the big frustration for me, was not how much crap is out there, it's how much really good stuff is out there that you just... There's nowhere to put it. So there are these undiscovered great authors all around us who are writing these great novels that just get lost in all the noise.
It's really sad when you think about it. They can't find an agent, just because the agents are overwhelmed too.
Yeah.
It is sad. Okay, I am
And
getting.
publishers are picky. It's
Yeah.
hard
Right.
to find a good publisher.
Yeah,
And a lot of publishers want someone who's already famous, that they know they can sell
Right.
a lot of books.
and they spend a lot of money on people who are already famous.
Right.
And that doesn't leave them enough money to discover the people that need it. I mean, that need exposure. So
Exactly.
it's they have to make a living. I get it. Publishers are in it to make money, but
In some ways, it's like the movie business or the music business. I mean, it used to be these music companies would send out their scouts to the rock and roll clubs, and they discover these bands and sign these bands and take huge risks with the idea of creating. And now they rarely do that anymore. Now they stick with what they know is going to sell. And I think book publishing is similar.
And a lot of musicians are sort of doing their own thing now too, like marketing themselves
Yes.
online, and so it really is very similar.
it's just finding a way to make money with that. It's the
Right.
same in music and books. It's how do you sustain yourself while you're making art?
It is similar in some ways. It's good though, right? In the music business, there are a lot of these smaller independent labels now that have emerged, and in the book business, there are a lot of smaller niche or little publishers, good publishers, quality publishers, but small regional ones or boutique publishers or these kinds of things. And that, I think, is a great sign of a vibrant and flourishing book business. There's lots of trouble and there are lots of difficulties and lots of challenges, but the mainstream publishers are doing pretty good. And now we have more and more of these smaller and medium-sized publishers and businesses that are doing multiple things. You see these publishers, they have a bookshop, they have a magazine, what's the group in California? Anyway, McSorley's, McCready's, McSweeney's, right. They do books, they do magazines, they do a journal, they do events, so
Right.
companies are starting to figure out that they can create a new and sustainable business model with multiple revenue streams from all these different, and keep publishing good quality books.
Sometimes you have to do all that other stuff to keep publishing the good
Right.
quality books.
Right.
It's like the
lawsuit.
actors who tell you, I make one blockbuster
Right.
every few years so I can do my art films.
Right.
You know.
It is like that.
Well, and it makes a difference also. People like Pat Conroy, who took such an interest in nurturing the next generation of writers. That's huge. And,
Yes, it is.
I mean, that makes a big difference, because a blurb from him went a long way on a lot of undiscovered talent.
And not to mention, he started an actual publishing company with Jonathan at USC
That's huge.
Press.
That's huge.
And I don't know how y'all found your great writers. I know a lot of books came to your office, and then the best ones trickled down to Pat, but I'm not sure how you did that.
That may be a panel for another.
Anyway, how are we looking for time, Jonathan?
We got time for a couple of audience questions.
Okay. Anybody have a question out there?
Can you think of a time when you either were very favorable about a book or very unfavorable, and it seemed like the whole world took a different opinion?
Oh, interesting.
There's one that I'm really happy, the one bandwagon I'm really glad I didn't jump on was James Fry, his memoir, A Million Little Pieces.
Right.
You remember how big that was?
Oh, yes.
I read it and just thought, there's something just not right
Something's
here.
off.
Yeah, something's off. But everybody else was just heaping praise on him and talking about how wonderful it was. And
Because of Oprah, right?
yeah. So I was really proud I didn't have to walk that one back. But, you remember it?
I'm trying to think. There must have been something. But I can't think of one. I remember writing a critical review of the Batman movies. Does that count?
Which ones?
All three. I summarized the latest trilogy.
Okay.
Well, the most negative thing I ever wrote the entire time of my book career was about Who Moved My Cheese. Do y'all know that book? What a ridiculous book. I mean, no offense, I hope the author's not in this room, but and it was like the 25th anniversary of it. It had been on the New York Times bestseller list for 25 years or something ridiculous. And I was, at the time I was the op-ed editor. The book column was running in the perspective section, so I was working in the editorial department. And I remember seeing, I got the New York Times bestseller list that week, and I saw, like always, Who Moved My Cheese, number 8 or whatever. I'm like, who is still buying that book? After 25 years, is there anybody left who hasn't read it? And so
I haven't.
And I hadn't either. So I said, I'm going to read it. And it's like 20 pages, it's nothing to it. So I took it home and read it, and I just wanted to beat my head on the wall. What in the world is this phenomenon about? So I wrote about it and just said, who are you people who are reading this?
And loving it.
And tell me what's in here that you didn't know before you opened the book. So that was the most negative thing. And I don't know if the author's dead or not, but I never heard from anybody in a negative way about it.
Really?
And a lot of people agreed with me, but it's probably still on the bestseller list.
Anybody else?
I think Ken Blanchard was buying those books.
Good point.
Someone from a book club deciding her recommendations who read the book club said, it's Goodreads likes it, and that means the most to me. What do you think about the Goodreads trend?
Oh.
Do you see any link between that and the fact you're owned by Amazon now? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I'm really troubled by it. I don't trust it. I just think it's too easy to manipulate, and I don't know how you vet who's writing on there. I understand every author I know always says, if I say I read your book and really liked it, just in passing, they say, would you mind going on Goodreads or Amazon or just putting a note in? And I'm like, no, I'd rather not. But,
Yes, I would mind.
yeah. But you don't know. You don't know. Somebody might be paying somebody just to go on there and write 1,000 reviews. It's just, I don't know. It just bothers me. And again, I'm glad I don't have to deal with it anymore.
Yeah, it's a marketing ploy. It's to sell books, and it sort of raises the question of how we value criticism and whether we value criticism, real criticism, professional criticism. There's a reason for good criticism and a purpose for good criticism, and there's a way to go about doing good criticism, and it's a thing, it's this thing that has value. And I think Goodreads and Yelp and all this stuff, and Amazon and social media are all forces that erode our appreciation for and conception of criticism, and we begin to forget or not even understand properly what it is. The idea that anybody can write anything and that it's legitimate. It is legitimate. There's nothing wrong with going to Yelp and putting in a review. It's perfectly fine. It can even be helpful. But there's a professionality that I think is lacking, and that we need more of, but that we're getting less and less of, in fact. And that's troubling.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's sort of turned like all the world is a critic now, except they're really not.
Except they're not at all. The Post and Courier doesn't publish reviews anymore. We have the book page and we do book reviews, but that's it. We used to publish concert reviews and stuff, and not anymore.
How about film reviews?
No.
No?
Sometimes they'll...
Because you can just go on Rotten Tomatoes.
Well, or they'll take something from The Wire. We'll get an AP review or a Washington or something that's available on The Wire. But we don't do our own reviews of things. And Charleston is an arts community, right? It's a pretty vibrant arts community with a great symphony and a great jazz orchestra and all these theaters and all this stuff. And we don't publish reviews.
Yeah, the AJC got rid of it. When they got rid of the book editing position, they got rid of the film critic, visual arts, classical music, pop music, everything went. All the critics we called it Ego Alley where we sat, but it was just closed down.
Well, on a small scale, we're the same way in Beaufort. I have Low Country Weekly, and I would love to have reviews, but I don't have anybody to write them. And we only come out every 2 weeks, so once we're out, and the thing has already happened, and it's just, we're not a daily, so.
Yeah, but that raises an interesting question about the purpose of a review.
Right.
And this applies to books as
Good
well,
point.
right? So I'll approach any kind of review, whether it's a book review or a concert review or whatnot, the same way, with the assumption that the vast majority, 99% of the people who read that review are not going to read the book, and they're not going to go to the concert. It's just statistical, right? A review, in my mind, shouldn't be about whether or not a person should buy the tickets or go buy the book. The review should be standalone. It should be interesting and valuable in and of itself, because the vast majority of readers are basically living vicariously through me, right, or through the reviewer. They're not going to go see the show, and they're probably not going to read the book. But they can get some sense of the book and some sense of the importance of the book and the quality of the book and something about the author by reading the review. And if it's a good review, then it's essay-like. It's maybe bringing to bear on this book experiences and knowledge that I have, comparisons to other things, context, and so on and so forth. And the best kind of review, in my opinion, is kind of one that functions as a standalone essay.
I totally agree. I think a great review is a work of art in itself and such a delight to read. It does often send me to buy the book, but sometimes I just go, wow, that was great, and then I never think about the book again.
It'll send you to go buy the book because it's an interesting review, and the people who are interested in the book are going to go buy the book. Like that's going to happen no matter what.
Right.
So, and this is what a lot of newspaper editors fail to understand, right? So they only want the review if it's a new book and it's hitting the shelves now, or if the concert is coming up, or there's more to see, right? So you review the first night because you want. If it's a one-night only concert, don't bother reviewing it, right? Which to me is perverse, because the one-night only concerts are usually those big blockbuster things that really deserve to be reviewed because they have, the famous people on stage, and yet we ignore them.
So you're kind of writing for the people who didn't get to go.
And you're writing for the people who didn't get to go,
right.
Which is the vast majority. I mean, how many seats can you sell in a theater?
Right.
Anybody else? Okay.
Do you each have a all-time favorite book that you've reviewed?
Wow.
I don't know that I could come up with that.
No.
I mean, there's definitely there are author interviews I've done that immediately spring to mind, but as far as just reviewing or writing a column about a book, there's not one that just stands out as being the most fun to do. It was all fun. I mean, I even at the AJC back in the glory days when we had 2 full pages for book reviews, dedicated book reviews, and then in addition to that, we could, I could squeeze in some author Q&As in other sections of the newspaper. I got very crafty about talking the sports guys into letting me put a Q&A in about, some sports figure who had written a good book, or something in the opinion section, or, getting it in other places beyond the book. But, now they just don't have that kind of dedicated space. But, where was I going with that?
I lost track too.
Yeah.
So I don't have a favorite book that I reviewed, or even a favorite review, but I do prefer and derive the most satisfaction and pleasure from reviewing books that I care a lot about.
Yeah.
Even if I
Definitely. disagree
or don't like it, a book that really grabs me and that I've invested in, then it's rewarding to write a review about that book. Yeah. The obligatory review's no fun.
Yeah, right. And discovering people is always fun. I remember the first thing I read about Ron Rash, and I've been telling everybody since then, just go out immediately, buy every Ron Rash book you can find. But that just the joy of reading that for the first time and reviewing it and getting to share that with other people, that was one of the highlights of that job.
Are you a fast reader?
I am incredibly fast if I'm just reading for pleasure.
If she's not putting sticky notes.
If I'm not putting sticky notes and taking notes, but I'm very fast. I can read a novel in 4 hours.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Okay.
But that's not speed reading. That's definitely, I'm not skimming, I am reading, and that's uninterrupted
really fast.
4 hours. But I've done that my whole life. So it's just, I always, when I was a book editor, I would have 1 novel going all the time and 2 nonfictions going at the same time, just kind of so you could change it up every now and then.
I have a couple of friends who do that, but I've never been able to do that.
And it was it was easier if I was just looking to see if something has enough content and enough worth to go out to a reviewer. So you're just kind of reading it to see, well, this is a pretty good biography, and you know it in 50 pages, so you send it on out. So that's a different kind of reading.
Jonathan, is there time for one more or not?
That's
I have a question for the audience.
Uh-oh. Is it good, though?
I don't know. But can one or two of you tell us what you think about book reviews and their value? And do you read them? Do you look forward to them? Do they influence you? How do they influence you? I'm curious to know what you think.
I think that there's a certain importance in the content of the review, not necessarily the opinion or the critique, but the content itself, because some of the reviews that I read for informational purposes because I respect the voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important responsibility of the viewer to deliver a certain amount of content over and above an opinion or
Information about the book itself.
Tell you what the book is about without giving it away.
But the content, I read New York Times, I read the Wall Street Journal, and the reviews that I find there deliver information that I did not have elsewhere.
Right.
In a very capsulated way.
Yeah. What else do you look for in a book review?
I read them just to see if it might be something that I'd be interested in going out and purchasing.
Who reads something other than the Times, other than the New York Times reviews?
I'm a retired librarian, so read them. But, and I think what I look for in a review is a writer who obviously does read the material and cares about the quality of the writing, and I totally agree with you about the stuff online, that it's, why on earth would you respect the opinion of someone you know not, who may have been paid 50 cents to say, oh, I love this book. So I think when you read a lot of reviews, you start knowing who the reviewers are, who read carefully or who consider a book context and whether it's worth the read in the grand scheme of all the books that are out there being published. So I count on you people. I think it's really important.
Just an observation though, the Goodreads and the Amazon and all the things that they influence us even if we resist them, right?
Something sticks.
Yeah, you see those stars and you see how many people review. There's 800 more.
Yeah.
And it influences us. It does.
Have you noticed that everybody always gets like 4 stars? It's like there's always a big group of people who hated the book, and then a much bigger group at the top who loved it, and then it all seems to equal out.
It's friends of the authors. It's so troubling to me that you can't look at that in any kind of rational way. And I mean, I'm sure there are people who go in with good intentions who have genuine opinions who don't know the author, but I think overall it's so driven by personal connections.
But if you were the author, wouldn't you ask your friends?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's great. Me
People ask
too.
me all the time. Shannon, do you have a question?
So if a lot of this is foil, right, marketing, how do you discover great books?
That's all.
But
You mean as a reader or as an editor?
As a reader or...
Word of mouth is always good.
Yeah, word of mouth.
Book clubs.
But what is word of mouth?
I think Facebook, really. I mean, that's... I think it all comes back to we think a good book review is the best way, right?
Yeah, it's harder, I think, today than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago because of this. I think there are fewer trusted reviewers doing the work. Yeah. And the ones who are still reviewing are not dedicated to it full time. I mean, that's just gone. So I think it's still important to find somebody you trust, find reviewers at any publications. I mean, the good thing about the internet is that you have access to 1 million publications. So find the ones that you do trust, find the reviewers that know what they're doing, and again, look for word of mouth,
have a good book club with readers that you trust.
And I think we've all had the experience of reading a review and thinking, oh my God, I have to get that book, right? There's just something about the way it's written and the way it's describing the book that we know that book. We got to go read that book. And how often does that happen, though? I mean, you read of these various book reviews. How often does a book review convince you to go buy the book? Often?
Okay.
You didn't know how important you were until you came.
No, I didn't know. Yeah.
You know,
All right.
book festivals are great too. That's a great way of discovering people, and you get to dip in and out and hear people read from their works, and it's a good way. And publishers still invest a little money in sending people out on that kind of tour.
Y'all, I'm getting the signal over here.
Okay, we're getting the hook.
You two are so interesting. We could stay up here for another hour, but I'm getting the evil eye from Jonathan, and I see Cassandra over here. So our keynote people are here. This was great fun. Thank y'all so much, and thank y'all for being a great audience.